Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into quite a significant piece of legislation today.
Absolutely. The South African National Space Agency Act of 2008.
Yeah, this act is basically the blueprint, isn't it, for the country's whole space ambition.
It really is. It sets the entire stage.
So our mission here, for you listening, is to get past maybe the dry summary you might find online.
Right. We want to give you a real feel for it.
A clear, engaging understanding of what this law actually does, its practical side. Helpful if you're just curious or, maybe studying governance or law.
Definitely. And you see its importance right from the start in the preamble. It's not just about, setting up an office.
No. What does it lay out?
It lays out 5 core pillars. These really frame the whole mission, the why behind it all.
Okay, let's hear them. What are these pillars?
So, first, promoting peaceful space use and, importantly, international cooperation.
Peaceful use, got it. Second.
Second, boosting research, specifically space science research.
Makes sense for a space agency. Third.
Third is about people and tools, advancing scientific engineering through human capital development, training people, building expertise.
Right, building capacity. And fourth.
Fourth is about industry, creating an environment that helps industrial development, in space tech, commercialization potential.
Okay, bringing in the business side. And the fifth pillar.
And the fifth, probably the most direct one, is just establishing the agency itself, the South African National Space Agency, SANSA.
SANSA. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, especially for anyone looking at, say, public law or finance. What is SANSA, legally speaking?
Good question. Section 2 establishes it as a juristic person.
A juristic person, so not just a government department branch.
Exactly. It has its own legal existence. Think of it like a company in some way.
It can enter contracts, own property.
All of that. It can operate with a degree of independence, which is vital for something this specialized, gives it agility.
But that independence must come with checks, surely, especially with big budgets involved.
Absolutely, and that's where the other key part comes in. The Act explicitly ties SANSA to the Public Finance Management Act, the PFMA from 1999.
The PFMA. Okay, so that means serious financial oversight.
The highest level, it subjects SANSA to strict government financial scrutiny. It's the accountability mechanism, ensures transparency.
So we have this legally independent entity, SANSA, but it's financially accountable under the PFMA. Let's talk mandate then. Section 1, right? The why and the what.
Yes. Section 4 outlines the objects of the agency. It basically takes those 5 pillars we mentioned.
From the preamble.
Exactly. And synthesizes them into a clearer mission statement. So, again, peaceful use of space, fostering research.
Communications, navigation, space physics too.
Yes. All those specific research areas, plus advancing skills through people and infrastructure, supporting industrial development, and fostering international cooperation.
It's really about ensuring space science translates into, national benefit. Economic growth, maybe.
That's a huge part of it, translating science into tangible benefits.
Now, you mentioned something crucial earlier, the difference between what SANSA must do and what it may do.
Yeah.
The mandatory versus the strategic functions.
Yes, that's in Section 5. Section 5.1 lists the mandatory duties, the non-negotiables. Section 5.2 outlines the strategic things it can choose to do.
Okay, let's focus on the mandatory first. What absolutely has to happen?
2 things really stand out. First, SANSA must implement space programs and strategies that align with the national space policy.
And that policy comes from?
Specifically, policies made under the older Space and Affairs Act of 1993. So there's continuity linking it to existing frameworks.
Right. It doesn't operate in a vacuum. What's the second mandatory function? You mentioned it had real-world consequences.
It does. This one is quite significant. The agency must acquire, assimilate, and disseminate space satellite imagery.
Okay, satellite pictures. For whom?
For any organ of state.
Wait, any organ of state? That sounds potentially huge.
It is. Think about it. Agriculture, planning, disaster management, border security.
So SANSA becomes a central hub for government satellite data.
The mandatory source, yes. It positions SANSA not just as a science body, but deep into policy support and potentially national security infrastructure.
That's a powerful dual role, isn't it?
Yeah.
Primarily scientific, but with this mandated state support function using satellite tech.
A profound responsibility, definitely. And it leads directly into those strategic functions, the things it may do.
Right, the Section 5.2 stuff,
Yeah.
the flexibility, what stands out there. I remember something about commercial activity.
Yes, this is where the Act gets quite modern, quite forward-looking. SANSA has the authority, the option to establish or acquire an interest in a company.
Like start a spin-off company or invest in one.
Exactly. Under the Companies Act framework, the purpose: to develop or exploit invention or technological space expertise or innovation.
So they're not just doing research, they're legally empowered to help bring it to market. Public-private partnerships, maybe?
Precisely. It gives them commercial clout. It provides a mechanism for that, which is vital in a field as expensive as space. They can help commercialize the tech they develop or foster.
It sounds like they wanted more than just a research agency. They wanted an engine for a potential space industry.
That seems to be the intent, yes. And these strategic powers also let SANSA establish specific programs.
What kind of programs?
Things like enabling technologies, coordinating space science missions, but also space mission applications.
Meaning how the data from spacecraft is actually used.
Yes, the usage and dissemination of sensor data. And also space mission operations, the practical day-to-day running of spacecraft.
So they can manage the whole chain, from building capacity to flying the missions, getting the data, and even helping commercialize it.
It's very comprehensive, a full life cycle approach.
Okay, with that much scope, that much power,
Yeah.
who's actually in charge? Let's talk governance. Section 2, right?
Right, the governance framework. The agency acts through its board, that's laid out in Section 6.
The board. Who sits on it?
Typically a chairperson, then somewhere between 10 and 15 other members, plus the CEO who serves ex officio, meaning they're on the board because of their job.
And this board is the ultimate oversight body.
Correct. They guide and direct the agency. And getting onto this board isn't easy. Section 7 has some pretty strict requirements.
Such as? What are they looking for?
Well, first, basic stuff. Must be citizens or permanent residents, but then they need to be distinguished in space science or tech, or have other really relevant skills or experience.
So expertise is paramount.
Definitely. But it's not just expertise. The Act insists the board must be broadly representative.
Representative of what?
Of the space sector itself, and crucially, representative of the demographics of the Republic.
Ah, so diversity and representation are legally mandated for the board. That's quite specific.
It is, written right into the law. It ensures the board reflects the nation it serves, not just a narrow group of experts.
And that focus on good governance, it seems to drill down even further. There are specific professional requirements, too.
Yes, to make sure they can handle the complexities. The board must include at least one member with a legal qualification.
A lawyer on the board. Makes sense given the legal status and contracts.
And also at least one member with financial expertise.
Because of the PFMA link and managing large budgets, presumably?
Exactly. So it's not just a science committee. It's designed as a fully functional executive oversight body with legal, financial, and technical competence.
And accountability mechanisms. How do they ensure integrity once appointed?
Section 12 requires disclosure of interests right at the start. Any potential conflicts have to be declared.
Transparency from day one.
And the board's functions. Beyond just meeting, Section 9 covers this.
Yes, Section 9 says the board oversees the agency's performance, monitors the research quality, and crucially, must immediately tell the minister about anything that could seriously affect the agency achieving its objects.
So they have a duty to flag problems upwards.
A direct line to the minister for major issues.
Now, speaking of the minister, what if the board itself becomes the problem? If things go completely sideways, is there an ultimate check?
There is. Section 13A. It's sometimes called the nuclear option. The minister has the power to dissolve the entire board. Dissolve the whole board. Under what circumstances? That sounds drastic.
It is, and it's only under specific, serious conditions, like if the board simply cannot perform its duties anymore.
Okay, inability to function. What else?
Or if there's a complete breakdown in the relationship between the board and the minister. Or even an internal breakdown among board members themselves, making effective work impossible.
High-stakes situations.
Yeah.
But giving a minister power to fire an entire board, that sounds like it could be open to political influence.
That's always a concern with such powers, but the Act includes a vital legal safeguard, a check and balance.
Which is?
If the minister decides to dissolve the board, they must comply with the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act 2000 PAA.
BOJ. The Administrative Justice Act. So the minister's decision has to be fair.
Procedurally fair, yes.
Yes.
And rational and legally justifiable. It means the decision isn't just arbitrary. It can be challenged in court if it doesn't meet the PIJA standards.
That's a critical protection. Due process, even at that high level.
Absolutely. It anchors the minister's power in law.
And if dissolution does happen, what then? Does everything just stop?
No, the Act sets clear timelines to ensure continuity. An interim board must be put in place within 21 days.
Just 3 weeks. Quick turnaround.
And a new permanent board must be constituted within 180 days. So space policy keeps moving.
Okay, so we have the board providing oversight, potentially facing dissolution under strict rules, but who runs the place day to day?
That's the chief executive officer, the CEO, mentioned in Section 14.
How is the CEO appointed?
Appointed by the board, importantly, through a transparent and competitive process.
Not a political appointment, then.
Supposedly merit-based. The CEO is responsible for the administration, the general management, the day-to-day functioning, and they report directly to the board.
So there's a clear hierarchy. CEO manages, board oversees, minister holds ultimate accountability for the board itself.
Exactly. A structured system of governance and management.
So let's pull this all together. What does this act mean, really, when you synthesize it?
Well, I think it's more than just a law setting up an agency.
How so?
It's really a blueprint, isn't it? A state-led strategy for technological and scientific advancement through space.
But it seems carefully balanced. It has these ambitious mandates, global cooperation, research, boosting industry.
Yes, very ambitious. But balanced, as you say, with really strict, quite modern requirements for how it's governed.
Transparency, financial accountability under the PFMA, representative board, legal and financial expertise required.
All of that, it makes it a powerful framework. It's designed not just to set goals, but to provide a robust structure for actually implementing policy and achieving those space ambitions.
A tool for turning ambition into action with guardrails.
That's a good way to put it. Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture, think about that tension we touched on earlier.
The dual role.
Yeah.
Science versus state support.
Exactly. The agency must acquire and disseminate satellite imagery for any organ of state. That immediately serves national needs security, infrastructure management, resource monitoring. Very practical.
But at the same time,
its core objects scream peaceful use of space and international cooperation. Science for global good.
so the tech they use for national security might be the same tech they're meant to share or develop collaboratively internationally.
Precisely. There is an inherent dynamic there. The utility of their technology for national, sometimes sensitive purposes potentially bumps up against the spirit of open, peaceful, international science.
That sounds like a constant balancing act.
It must be, and it raises a really interesting question for you to think about looking forward. Given this structure, given these potentially conflicting mandates,
Yes.
how does an agency like SANSA, day to day, continuously negotiate those ethical and security boundary lines, especially as technology evolves? Where do you draw the line between national interest served by surveillance or data control and the commitment to peaceful, cooperative space exploration?
That's the complex tightrope they have to walk. A fascinating challenge embedded right within their founding legislation.
Indeed. That negotiation is central to implementing South Africa's national space strategy in the real world.